My dad called my diploma worthless as he shredded it. Now he works for the worthless one. Can you imagine the man who was supposed to be your biggest supporter, the one who always told you education was a waste, actually tearing up your college diploma in front of your entire family, mocking every single year of your hard work? Well, that happened to me. But what my father didn't know was that humiliating moment was actually the day he signed his own company's death warrant and launched my career to heights he could only dream of. Listen, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college. 3. Because my father? He said education was a waste for someone who'd just end up married anyway. He wanted me to work at his construction company, Brennan Construction, answering phones just like my mom did before she finally left him when I was 15. Every single semester, he'd tell me I was wasting money I didn't have on a useless piece of paper. He'd go on about how real work happened with your hands, not sitting in some classroom, learning theories from people who couldn't make it in the real world. But I kept going. Night classes, summer sessions, whatever it took to graduate in 4 years, paying my own way. My older brother, Eddie, he dropped out after freshman year to work for Dad and immediately became the golden child. Dad would bring him to job sites, teach him the business, introduce him to clients as the future of Brennan Construction. At family dinners, he'd talk about Eddie's latest project, while I ate quietly, too exhausted from studying after my shifts to argue anymore. When I made the dean's list, Dad said they probably lowered the standards. When I got accepted into the business program, he said they just needed to fill quotas. Nothing I did was real to him, just participation trophies and handouts. The day of graduation came. I didn't even tell him about the ceremony. I knew what his reaction would be. But Eddie mentioned it at Sunday dinner, and Dad suddenly decided the whole family should go. He actually said, and I quote, "Someone should witness how much money she's wasted on a meaningless piece of paper." Can you believe that? He rented a van to transport everyone, my aunts, uncles, even his business partners, the Donovan brothers who owned the lumber supply company. He made this huge show of it, saying, "At least her graduation will be good for something since it gives everyone an excuse to take the day off." During the ceremony, while other parents were taking pictures and crying with pride, Dad sat there on his phone handling work calls. When they called my name for the business degree with honors, he didn't even look up. Eddie actually had to elbow him to get him to stop talking. After the ceremony, everyone was outside taking pictures. Dad walked up while I was holding my diploma, posing with my roommates. He grabbed it out of my hands and held it up to his business partners, saying, "This is what 20,000 in debt looks like." He said, "I could have been making real money these past 4 years instead of playing pretend college student." Then he started reading it out loud in this mocking voice, emphasizing every word like it was a joke. When he got to the part about honors, he laughed and said, "They give those out to everyone now, just like participation trophies." I reached for my diploma and he held it above my head. He said I needed to understand that this paper wouldn't get me anywhere in the real world, that employers would see right through me. He said the only reason I even graduated was because schools were too soft to fail anyone these days. Then he did it. He ripped it in half. Right there. In front of everyone. My family, my friends, his business partners. He tore it into pieces and threw them at my feet, saying, "Now it's worth what you've actually learned," which was nothing. People were recording not to be mean but because they were shocked. My aunt gasped. My uncle told him he'd gone too far. The Donovan brothers, they just looked uncomfortable and walked away. Dad kept going, saying I needed to learn that fancy degrees don't mean anything in construction, which was the only job I'd be able to get anyway once I realized the real world didn't care about my participation award. Eddie tried to pick up the pieces but Dad stepped on them. And that's when Mrs. Donovan came back. Turns out, she'd graduated from the exact same business program 20 years ago and now ran the financial side of their lumber company. She walked right up to my dad and asked if he thought her degree was worthless too. Dad tried to backtrack, stammering that it was different. She asked how exactly it was different. Was it because she'd already proven herself? Because she was successful? Or because he needed their business? She then turned to me, a complete stranger, and said their company had an opening in accounts management if I was interested. She said they'd been looking for someone with my exact degree and internship experience, which she'd noticed on the program. Dad laughed and said I didn't have any real experience. Mrs. Donovan asked if he'd even looked at my resume. He hadn't. She pulled out her phone and showed him my LinkedIn. I watched my father's face change as Mrs. Donovan scrolled, her finger moving down the screen to show him every single internship I'd completed while he was telling everyone I was wasting my time. She pointed to the financial modeling project I led for a regional retail chain, the one that saved them $40,000 in inventory costs, and his jaw actually went slack. Then she showed him my accounting software certifications. QuickBooks Advanced, SAP Financial, Microsoft Dynamics, all earned during those night shifts at the diner when I was too tired to see straight but studied anyway. His defensive posture crumbled as she kept scrolling, showing him letters of recommendation from professors and supervisors, awards for academic excellence, presentations I'd given at business conferences. Mrs. Donovan looked up from her phone and said their accounts management position started at $58,000 a year with full benefits, health insurance, retirement matching, and 2 weeks paid vacation. My father stood there with torn pieces of my diploma still under his boot, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Mr. Donovan stepped forward, his arms crossed over his chest, and mentioned that most construction foremen around here made $45,000 to $50,000. So, actually, my starting salary would be higher than what Eddie probably earned after 3 years working for Dad. Mrs. Donovan added that I'd be managing accounts for their top commercial clients, the developers and contractors who place six-figure orders, and she looked at my father when she said it, like she was daring him to dismiss that as unimportant. She told me to come by their office Monday morning at 9 o'clock if I wanted to discuss the position in detail. I said I'd be there. My father opened his mouth to say something about me needing to learn how the real world works first, but Eddie cut him off. My brother. He actually bent down and picked up the torn diploma pieces. He gathered them carefully, even the small fragments, and held them in his cupped hands like they mattered. It was the first time he'd ever chosen my side over Dad's. And I felt this weird rush of gratitude mixed with anger that it took something this bad for him to finally stand up. I drove to Michaela's apartment that night because I couldn't go home and face my father after what he'd done. She opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at my face and pulled me inside without asking questions. We sat on her couch while I told her everything. How he ripped up my diploma in front of everyone. How Mrs. Donovan offered me a job right there. How Eddie actually helped me for once. Michaela kept shaking her head and saying she couldn't believe he actually destroyed my diploma at my own graduation, that she'd seen parents be disappointed, but never cruel like that. She made tea, and we stayed up late talking about what I should wear to the Monday meeting, what questions I should ask, whether I should mention my father's company or pretend I had no connection to them. I realized around midnight that I needed to contact the registrar's office first thing Monday to get my diploma replaced since I'd need an official copy for employment verification. Michaela said I could stay with her as long as I needed, that her spare room was mine, and I felt grateful to have at least one person who understood why I couldn't go back home right now. Sunday dinner at my aunt's house was the most uncomfortable meal I'd ever sat through. My father showed up like nothing had happened, talking to Eddie about some commercial project bid they were working on, completely ignoring the fact that half the family was barely looking at him. My aunt moved around the kitchen with tight lips, slamming dishes harder than necessary, while my uncle sat at the head of the table reading the newspaper and not engaging in conversation. We made it through the salad course before my aunt finally put down her fork and asked my father why he was so threatened by my success that he had to humiliate me publicly at my graduation. The table went silent. My father's face turned red and he said he wasn't threatened. He just wanted me to understand that the real world doesn't care about fancy degrees from soft schools that hand out honors to everyone. My uncle folded his newspaper slowly and pointed out that Mrs. Donovan clearly cared about my degree since she offered me a job on the spot. A job that paid more than most of Dad's crew made. My father went quiet after that, pushing food around his plate, and we finished dinner in silence. Monday morning, I put on my best interview outfit, a navy suit I'd bought on sale specifically for job hunting, and drove to Donovan Lumber Supply's main office. The building was way more professional than I expected. All glass and steel with a modern reception area that had actual artwork on the walls. Mrs. Donovan and Mr. Donovan met me in a conference room with windows overlooking their lumberyard, where forklifts moved between stacks of materials and trucks loaded orders. They explained that Donovan Lumber had grown significantly over the past decade, expanding from a local supplier to a regional operation serving commercial construction projects across 3 states. They needed someone who could handle complex client accounts, someone who understood financial analysis and could spot trends and purchasing patterns. Mr. Donovan pulled out charts showing their growth trajectory and explained they were at a point where they needed professional management systems, not just handshake deals and gut feelings. Mrs. Donovan said that's where I would come in, bringing business school training to an industry that was still catching up to modern practices. Mrs. Donovan walked me through what the job would actually involve on a daily basis. I'd be managing payment schedules for their major contractors, making sure everyone paid on time while also negotiating flexible terms for reliable clients. I'd analyze purchasing patterns to identify opportunities for better supplier rates, looking at order histories to find bulk buying advantages or seasonal pricing trends. I'd coordinate with their sales team on client retention strategies, figuring out which customers were worth keeping, even if they negotiated hard on price, and which ones cost more in hassle than they brought in revenue. Everything she described matched exactly what I'd studied in my financial management and business analytics courses. The stuff my father said was useless theory. I felt this surge of confidence as she talked, realizing I actually knew how to do this work, that my internships and projects had prepared me for exactly these kinds of challenges. Mrs. Donovan asked if I had questions, and I asked about their software systems, their reporting structure, and how they measured success in the accounts management role. She smiled and said those were exactly the right questions. They offered me the position officially with a start date 2 weeks out, which would give me time to get my diploma replaced and take a breath after the chaos of graduation and everything that followed. Mr. Donovan mentioned they'd worked with Brennan Construction for years, that my father was a reliable client, even if his company was old-fashioned in some ways. There was this awkward moment where we all knew what happened at my graduation, the ripped diploma, the public humiliation, but Mr. Donovan just said he hoped the family situation would improve and left it at that. Mrs. Donovan added that what happened at graduation didn't reflect on me professionally, that she judged me based on my actual qualifications and was confident I'd excel in this role. I signed the offer letter right there, my hand steady as I wrote my name, and they gave me a folder full of employee paperwork to complete before my start date. We shook hands, and Mrs. Donovan said she was looking forward to working with me, that she saw a lot of her younger self in my determination to succeed despite obstacles. I walked out of that office feeling like I was floating, like maybe Mrs. Donovan destroying my father's narrative about my worthless degree was worth more than the actual diploma he destroyed. She'd proven in front of everyone that my education had value, that real companies with real money were willing to pay me for the skills I'd worked so hard to develop. I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving away, just letting myself feel the victory of it. When I got to Michaela's apartment that evening, I told her everything about the meeting and the official offer. She disappeared into her kitchen and came back with a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, some fancy label her parents had given her for graduation. We opened it and toasted to the fact that I was starting my actual career, the one I'd planned and worked for, while my father had to sit with the reality that his daughter, with a supposedly worthless degree, had just landed a professional position that proved him completely wrong. Michaela raised her glass and said, "Here's to proving people wrong by succeeding," and I clinked my glass against hers and felt genuinely happy for the first time since walking across that graduation stage. The next 2 weeks, I crashed at Michaela's place and ignored every call from my father's number. Eddie sent me 3 texts during that time. Each one saying Dad was in a mood and asking if I was okay. I texted back that his mood wasn't my problem anymore, that Dad made it real clear what he thought of my degree and my accomplishments. Eddie sent back a thumbs up and didn't push it further. I spent those weeks getting my diploma replaced through the registrar's office, which cost me $50 and required filling out paperwork that asked why I needed a replacement. I wrote, "Original was destroyed," and left it at that. Michaela went with me to pick up the new one, and when they handed it to me in its protective tube, she made me promise not to let anyone touch it ever again. My first day at Donovan Lumber came faster than I expected. I showed up 20 minutes early in clothes I'd bought specifically for this job. A dark blue shirt and black pants that Michaela said made me look professional without trying too hard. Mrs. Donovan met me in the lobby and walked me back to the accounts department, which was this big open space with cubicles and windows that actually let in natural light. She introduced me to Joanne Perry, who would be training me for the next month. Joanne was maybe 45, with short gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She shook my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts and told me to grab a seat at the empty desk next to hers. She pulled up the client management system on my computer and started walking me through it without any small talk or welcome speech. She said half of what I learned in school wouldn't apply directly to this work, but the thinking part would save me every single day. She showed me how to track orders, manage payment schedules, and flag accounts that were running behind. She didn't sugarcoat anything, telling me straight up that some clients would try to push deadlines, and I'd need to push back without being rude about it. I took notes on everything she said, filling up 6 pages in my notebook before lunch. The first month went by in this blur of learning their systems and trying to remember everyone's names. I studied past account histories during my lunch breaks, reading through years of orders to understand how different contractors worked. Joanne had me sit in on meetings with major clients so I could see how she handled negotiations and payment discussions. One of those clients was Brennan Construction. When I saw the name on the meeting schedule, my stomach dropped. Joanne noticed me staring at the calendar and asked if something was wrong. I told her that was my father's company, and I wasn't ready to be in the same room with him yet. She nodded once and said she'd handle that account until I felt comfortable. No questions asked. I appreciated that more than she probably knew. The guy in the cubicle next to mine was Aaron Gunter, and he'd been working there for 6 months before I started. He was 26 and always drinking energy drinks that made his leg bounce under his desk. We started this competition in the second week about who could spot cost-saving chances faster in client accounts. He'd find something and lean over the cubicle wall to tell me about it, and I'd try to find something better in the next account I reviewed. He was good at his job, but I noticed he relied mostly on current data and recent orders. I started going back further, reading through 5 years of purchase orders to understand patterns and how clients bought materials. When I mentioned this to Aaron, he admitted he'd never bothered looking past 2 years because it seemed like too much work. That's when I started catching up to him in our competition. 8 weeks into the job, I was reviewing accounts for 3 major clients and noticed something weird. All 3 of them consistently ordered more materials than they actually used, then returned the extra for credit. The pattern showed up month after month, costing everyone money in delivery fees and restocking time. I pulled all the data together and showed it to Joanne. She looked at my spreadsheet for a long time before asking what I thought they should do about it. I suggested setting up a quarterly meeting system where we'd review upcoming projects with these clients and help them order based on actual needs instead of rough guesses. Joanne took my proposal straight to Mrs. Donovan, who called me into her office that afternoon. Mrs. Donovan loved the idea, but said I'd need to present it to the clients myself to prove I could handle that kind of professional pressure. The thought of presenting to 3 construction company owners made my hands sweat, but I agreed because saying no wasn't an option if I wanted to prove myself. The first presentation was the hardest. The client sat across from me asking questions about my data and my projections. I answered everything using the patterns I'd found in their purchase history, showing them exactly how much money they'd saved by ordering more carefully. They agreed to try the system for 6 months. The second client said yes after 10 minutes of discussion. The third client, an older guy who'd been in construction for 30 years, said he'd think about it. When I got back to my desk looking disappointed, Joanne told me that was basically a yes in construction speak. That guys like him never agreed to anything on the spot. She was right. He called 2 days later to sign up. My father heard about the new system through industry gossip. Eddie texted me one night saying Dad had complained at Sunday dinner that Donovan Lumber was getting too fancy with their processes and making everything complicated. Eddie also mentioned that Brennan Construction's profit margins had been getting smaller for months, but Dad refused to look at why or change anything about how he ran things. I didn't respond to that text because what was I supposed to say? 4 months into my job, the quarterly meeting system had saved those 3 clients an average of $8,000 each. They started telling other contractors about it, and suddenly we had 5 more companies asking if they could join the program. Mr. Donovan pulled me into his office one morning and told me I'd already proved their decision to hire me was right, that it almost never happened this fast with new workers. He said most people took a full year to really contribute something valuable, but I'd done it in 1 quarter. That conversation made me feel like maybe I actually belonged in this professional world my father said didn't exist for people like me. I ran into my father at a construction supply expo in September. Donovan Lumber had a booth there and I was working it with Aaron, handing out information about our new consultation program. I saw my father walking down the aisle between booths with Eddie beside him. He was looking at his phone, not paying attention to where he was going, and almost walked right past our booth. Then he looked up and saw me standing there in my work clothes with my Donovan Lumber badge clipped to my shirt. We made eye contact for maybe 3 seconds. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again. He gave me this tiny nod, the kind you'd give a stranger, and kept walking. Eddie glanced back at me with this apologetic look, but he followed Dad without stopping. I stood there feeling like I'd been punched in the chest, even though nothing had actually happened. That night, I sat in my apartment, the one I just rented using my first real paychecks, and cried harder than I had since graduation day. Part of me still wanted my father to be proud of what I'd accomplished. I wanted him to see me at that expo and realize he'd been wrong about everything. But he just walked past like I was nobody, like my success didn't matter at all. Michaela showed up an hour later with Chinese food and let herself in with the spare key I'd given her. She found me on the couch with red eyes and sat down without saying anything about it. She opened the food containers and handed me chopsticks, then reminded me that I was doing amazing at my job. She said my father's inability to see that was his loss, not mine, and that I needed to stop giving him power over how I felt about my own accomplishments. I ate my noodles and tried to believe her. But it was hard when the person whose approval I'd wanted my whole life couldn't even stop to talk to me for 5 minutes. 6 months passed, with me buried in work at Donovan Lumber, and the crying over my father's dismissal at the expo faded into background noise I mostly ignored. Mrs. Donovan called me into her office on a Wednesday morning and told me she was promoting me to senior accounts manager. The position came with a $15,000 raise and 3 junior staff members I'd be responsible for training. I accepted immediately and spent the next week teaching new hires the same analytical methods that had saved multiple client accounts. Balancing my career advancement with consulting for my father's company felt satisfying in a way I couldn't fully explain. I was proving I could succeed professionally while helping save Brennan Construction, and I didn't have to sacrifice who I was to do either. My father asked if he could attend one of my client presentations at Donovan Lumber. I told him the presentation was for major commercial accounts and he needed to sit quietly if he came. He showed up early and took a seat in the front row instead of hiding in the back. I walked through a quarterly analysis for a developer planning 6 projects over 2 years, showing how our supply coordination would save them $40,000 while improving timeline reliability. After the meeting ended and clients left, my father waited by the door. He said I was good at this work, really good. And he was sorry he didn't see it before. It wasn't a full apology for ripping up my diploma, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever expected from him. 4 months into consulting, the results at Brennan Construction were undeniable. They'd cut their debt in half and won 5 new projects using my bidding strategies and client relationship improvements. Eddie texted me updates showing employee retention rates climbing and clients leaving positive reviews about the company's improved organization. The project management software I'd insisted on was catching cost overruns before they became disasters. Suppliers were offering better rates because invoices got paid on time. My father's company was actually thriving instead of barely surviving. My father started asking my opinion on decisions during our meetings instead of just grudgingly accepting my recommendations after arguing first. He'd call me before submitting bids to run numbers past me or text questions about how to handle specific client situations. It wasn't the relationship I'd wanted growing up, where he was proud of my accomplishments and supported my education, but it was something more honest than what we'd had before. 3 months into the consulting arrangement, Mrs. Donovan called me into her office and offered me a promotion to senior accounts manager. The position came with a $15,000 raise and 3 junior staff members I'd be responsible for training. I accepted immediately and spent the next week teaching new hires the same analytical methods that had saved multiple client accounts. Balancing my career advancement with consulting for my father's company felt satisfying in a way I couldn't fully explain. I was proving I could succeed professionally while helping save Brennan Construction, and I didn't have to sacrifice who I was to do either. My father asked if he could attend one of my client presentations at Donovan Lumber. I told him the presentation was for major commercial accounts and he needed to sit quietly if he came. He showed up early and took a seat in the front row instead of hiding in the back. I walked through a quarterly analysis for a developer planning 6 projects over 2 years, showing how our supply coordination would save them $40,000 while improving timeline reliability. After the meeting ended and clients left, my father waited by the door. He said I was good at this work, really good. And he was sorry he didn't see it before. It wasn't a full apology for ripping up my diploma, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever expected from him. 4 months into consulting, the results at Brennan Construction were undeniable. They'd cut their debt in half and won 5 new projects using my bidding strategies and client relationship improvements. Eddie texted me updates showing employee retention rates climbing and clients leaving positive reviews about the company's improved organization. The project management software I'd insisted on was catching cost overruns before they became disasters. Suppliers were offering better rates because invoices got paid on time. My father's company was actually thriving instead of barely surviving. My father invited me to dinner at his house on a Sunday night. Eddie was there too. And after we ate, my father said he'd been thinking about the future of Brennan Construction. He suggested maybe I should come work there full-time, help him and Eddie run the business together as a family operation. I appreciated the offer, but told him I'd built my own career at Donovan Lumber, and I wasn't giving that up to work for him, even if our relationship had improved. I'd worked too hard to establish myself professionally to walk away from it now. Eddie nodded like he understood, but my father looked disappointed. Then my father did something I never expected. He apologized for ripping up my diploma at graduation. He said he was threatened by my success because it challenged everything he believed about how the world works. He'd taken that fear out on me in the worst possible way, destroying something I'd earned through years of sacrifice and hard work. He couldn't undo what he did, but he wanted me to know he was wrong and he was proud of what I'd accomplished. His voice cracked slightly when he said the last part, and I realized how much it cost him to admit he'd been so completely wrong. I didn't forgive him immediately because that hurt ran too deep. The memory of him tearing my diploma into pieces in front of everyone still made my chest tight when I thought about it, but I acknowledged his apology and told him we could keep building from here. Our relationship would never be perfect or easy, but maybe it could be honest, which was more than I thought possible a year ago. Eddie looked relieved that we weren't fighting, and my father just nodded quietly. 6 months after I started consulting, Brennan Construction was stable and profitable again. My father implemented the last of my major recommendations, including hiring a full-time project coordinator to handle scheduling and client communication. Eddie took over creating a digital marketing presence because he was actually good at social media and website management. Even though my father initially thought it was a waste of time, the company's online reviews improved and younger clients started reaching out because Brennan Construction finally looked professional and modern instead of outdated. I transitioned from active weekly consulting to quarterly check-ins. This gave me back my evenings and weekends while ensuring Brennan Construction stayed on track with the systems I'd built. My father paid my final consulting invoice without complaint and added a bonus with a note that said, "Worth every penny." I framed that note and hung it in my home office next to my replacement diploma, which the university had issued 3 weeks after graduation. The torn pieces of the original were long gone, but I didn't need them anymore. A year and a half after graduation, I was thriving at Donovan Lumber with a senior management position and a salary that would have seemed impossible when I was working 3 jobs through college. My father's company was successful again using strategies I developed. And Eddie was finally getting recognition for his actual contributions instead of just being the golden child who did whatever Dad said. Our family dinners were less tense, though my father and I would probably never have an easy relationship. We were both too stubborn and we'd hurt each other too much for things to be simple, but we were trying, which was something. I was sitting in my office at Donovan Lumber when my father called to ask my advice on a potential merger opportunity with a smaller construction company. He walked me through the details and asked what I thought about the financial projections and timeline. I helped him think through the pros and cons, pointing out risks he hadn't considered and opportunities he was undervaluing. After we hung up, I looked at the replacement diploma on my wall next to my promotion letters and the framed note from my final consulting invoice. I didn't need his validation anymore, but it was nice that he finally saw what I'd known all along. My education and expertise were never worthless, and I'd proved it by succeeding on my own terms while still choosing to help him when he finally asked. Life wasn't perfect, but I'd built a career I was proud of, maintained my boundaries with family, and showed my father that his daughter with the worthless degree saved his entire business. That felt like the best kind of vindication. Phew. What a ride, right? It's incredible how much a moment of public humiliation can fuel your fire to prove everyone wrong, especially the people who should have believed in you most. Have you ever had someone dismiss your dreams or tell you that your efforts were worthless? How did you pick yourself up and ultimately prove them wrong? Tell me your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it.